Good morning. Shirley has a great passion for this teaching, you can tell. It's really sweet. Well, I get the chance to talk to you about wandering off the path. I thought about this topic all week, and I assumed it meant wandering off the spiritual path, but it could also include wandering off the path of being really good at our job, or I have friends whose parents wandered off their path of being parents. And we may have friends that kind of wander away from us and sometimes come back. In AA, wandering off the path may be wandering off the path of sobriety or wandering back onto the path of addiction. There's a lot of wandering we do in this world. And sometimes we see it here at the center. Sometimes people come in and they're so enthusiastic. They jump into classes, they jump into everything, and their life changes for the better. And when they got life all tied up in a little pretty bow, they start wandering. Sunday morning, let's sleep in. Maybe we'll go to Mount Shasta. Take another class, I've been there, done that. Meditation, well, I can meditate while I go hiking. So once we think we've got it all together, the wondering kind of niggles at us and says, maybe you really could have more fun doing something else. The word wandering means some aimless, slow movement of not staying on course. And sometimes when I see people who used to be very active here at the center, it's just not the same. And often they will wander back and they'll realize the value of being in a community of like-minded individuals and the value of being in service. Like yesterday, doing all the decorating. I can't tell you how much we laughed about some of the things we had to do, tying fishing line around little things, and the first thing everybody said, "Got to get my glasses." We had so much fun. It was just really sweet. So the truth is, life is a spiritual path. That's what it's all about, whether we're in this community or not, because it's all God in action. And we're always learning about life. And one of the things Paul mentioned to me this morning, he says, you're always talking about you're an individualized spiritual being. And he said, I get so tired of that. Maybe you could say you're a personal expression of God. I thought, oh, that feels really good. It's better than that word individualized, because we're on this ever-expanding journey that will last into infinity. We're not going to get it all this time around, likely, but we're going to make a lot of progress, especially in a community like this. Our ministers and practitioners are deeply dedicated to the spiritual path, and yet there's times even we start to wonder. Not for very long, though, because we know the bliss that comes with this work. When we sit down with someone and do a prayer treatment for them and their life shifts, there's nothing more wonderful and blissful for a practitioner just to see that happen. So we don't usually leave for too long, maybe while on vacation, but that's about it. So enough about wandering, because that wasn't the correct title for this talk. For the last 2 years, Home Office has invited ministers to submit talk titles with key concepts and quotes from the Science of Mind. And then they compile them all together and they send them out to all of us in the field. And every Thursday, Dr. Ken Gordon, he's the spiritual teacher, spiritual leader for our organization. He has a video of himself on YouTube, and that gets sent out to all of us. And he lives in Kelowna, British Columbia, so he's always standing out by the mountains or some creek, some absolutely gorgeous place. And he tells us the title of the talk and the key concepts and some things we may want to include. And that really does help kickstart our talk, because it takes me about 4 days to write a talk. And when I watched this Thursday, it wasn't wandering off the path. It was wondering off the path. Now, what is that? I was just a little ticked because I had my talk half done. Now it's wandering, W-O-N-D-E-R, wandering off the path. Well, of course, I go to the dictionary, and wondering means astonishment. astonishment about wandering off the path. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And it's used in things like, it's a wonder you weren't killed on that, whatever you were doing. You ever have somebody say that to you when you're swishing down the mountains or something? Or it also means admiration. Like, it's a wonder that you finished that marathon. So I thought, okay, astonishment, admiration. And then the third definition was rapt attention to something awesomely mysterious. Oh, now I've got it. Reading The Science of Mind. Awesomely mysterious. Is it really true that I'm the author of my experience? Is it really true that my thoughts are energy that create things in my life? Is it true that a prayer moves at the speed of light and I can pray for someone in Afghanistan and it goes there? That to me is awesomely mysterious. So when I think about what it feels like to wander off the path, a few words come to mind: anxiety, worry, and judgment. So I look around the world and there's a lot of people in this world that are off the path, so to speak, and they end up trying to kill other people in other communities. There's extreme despots who starve their own people. And yet at the other end of the spectrum, I see prayer flags in mountains in Tibet, and I see monks dressed in orange robes, and they're really on the path. They're really dedicated. So there's these extremes going on in the world, and I wonder about that. Because this philosophy called New Thought, the study of metaphysics, it's full of awesomely wonderful, mysterious things. As Einstein said when he got involved in metaphysics, it's absolutely creepy because things move like you wouldn't know at the metaphysical level. Well, lately I've been reading a book by Dr. David Hawkins. He's a world leader in the study of consciousness. The book is Transcending the Levels of Consciousness. Actually, the first time I read it, I wouldn't underline a thing. It was like sacred to me. Every page was a page turner, levels of consciousness. I just didn't want to put a mark in this book. So these past 2 weeks, I've been rereading it with pen in hand, underline, underline, underline. And it's amazing how much of the book I underline. And over 50 years of clinical studies, 50 years, Dr. Hawkins derived and organized the levels of consciousness that were personally experienced also by him, and levels that he had not experienced. And right now I'm at the part of the book where he's learning how to live in the divine presence and still be part of humanity and do his work, still function in his laboratory. This is an amazing thing. And yet he was gracious enough to write this book. So he was able to map levels of consciousness, and he calibrated them. And he calibrated them from, number one, basic existence, where you're breathing, to 1,000, which he says at this time in his knowledge is the highest energy level possible in the field of human beings. Only a few people have ever reached that level of 1,000. And he says people like Jesus and Buddha, Krishna, those who attained the level of consciousness of 1,000 experienced being in universal mind, experienced it. So now we're back on track in this talk about wondering. And I bet you're wondering more about this scale, this level of consciousness. Because we live in a field of energy. The whole universe is a field of energy. It's all energy. And we have infinite potential to tap into that, to manifest our life experience. And you hear this all the time. What you focus on, you water seeds, and you nurture these seeds of beliefs, and things manifest in your life, and we experience the results. Just as Jesus said, it is done unto us as we believe. Well, most of Dr. Hawkins' designations are based on personal power that we develop through education and life experience. And then at some point it goes on beyond there, but I'll stay right now with education and life experiences. So between levels of 1, where you're breathing, and levels of 200, consciousness includes pride, anger, fear, grief, apathy, hatred, guilt, and shame. From that level of consciousness, a person has varying degrees of hopelessness. Generally, feelings of being frightened and frustrated in the world. Most often, people who are at that level of consciousness feel like they're a victim. But once a person's consciousness reaches 200, something happens. Courage shows up. Courage, the willingness to try new things, the willingness to deal with issues in life instead of feeling like a victim. So as our consciousness level increases, we are able to face our fears. Now, you may know people that have been so hopeless or feeling like a victim, and for some reason, they had an experience or they learned something or they met you, and they started to shift that. They started to think, wait a minute, I'm ready to try new things. I'm ready to face my fears. So on the scale of 1 to 1,000, Dr. Hawkins says 200 is the first level of true personal power. That's where our personal power starts to show up. He found that crossing over that level of 200 is the most critical step in humanity. Emotionally, we begin to feel more positive. And yet at that level, our thoughts about this thing called God are, God, judgment. Are we going to be saved? So as we move up the scale, he says at level 250, we enter the realm of neutrality. Now, I thought it was a little too early for that. But he says, really, neutrality is the beginning of having confidence in our own mind, confidence in ourselves, where you don't really have to prove anything to anyone. We feel more peaceful, we feel more calm, we feel more content. It's like a flower opening in the warmth of the sun. We're starting to blossom. And there's no resistance to the grace of divine energy. He's really a New Thought metaphysician. I love the way he put that. Allow the grace of divine energy. And we start to understand there's so much more knowledge about the universe available to us. So at level 310, willingness is the key word. We're willing to participate in life. Our self-esteem starts to grow. We're more forgiving. We're more optimistic. And this encourages further growth. And here it's where we start pursuing spiritual truths. I don't know if you remember when you did. I do. Being away from Catholicism for many years, having that decision, it's time to learn more about this thing called spirituality. So at level 350, he says this is a major area of transformation where we embrace acceptance. We realize we have the capacity to live in harmony with life. We're more inclusive. We want to develop self-mastery in a lot of areas. The ego kind of quiets down and we become a little more honest with ourselves. That in itself turns on more desire for spiritual understanding, to understand this energy that we call God. And our view of God changes to one of inspiration. Oh, I feel inspired about the thought of the energy and the grace of God. Now at level 400, he said it's characterized by reason, where knowledge and education are highly valued. Because as you grow up, or as you learn through these, especially reading more scientific books, it can be easy to lose sight of the forest for the trees, and we become infatuated with these concepts but not applying them. We're missing the point that we are not just our mind. We're a soul on this incredible journey. Now, Hawkins characterizes the consciousness of the United States at 421 because his research shows that over 50% of the population are in some level working on self-improvement. I thought, okay, I see that. Look how popular Oprah is, Eckhart Tolle. There's a level of self-improvement going on here in a lot of the population. At the same time, he calibrates most of the world's consciousness stuck at below 200. And that, he feels, is a major obstacle to world peace. Now, you can see that when you think about the level of consciousness. Stuck in wanting to kill other people, control other people, that level of selfishness, greed, hate, anger, it permeates a lot of the world. At level 500, it's another major paradigm jump that only 4% of the world's population reaches. And it's called unconditional love. We talk a lot about that. When we start to touch and feel unconditional love, we reprioritize our life. We want more of that. Love becomes a guiding principle in our life. And our mind shifts from watching what we experience to observing, Eckhart Tolle, observing, being the observer of life. So with love, we become more inclusive, and our sense of self expands, and our idea of God also turns to love. Oh, now we've got a great circle going on here, a circle of love. At level 540, he said, this is the level of spiritually based self-help groups, spiritual healers, spiritual students, who have an expanded capacity for patience. I thought that was good. And a persistent positive attitude. He found that in highly motivated, spiritually disciplined groups, about 50 to 55% of the people in those groups reach the understanding and the feeling and the practice of unconditional love. So this is where we're headed if you decide to participate with us this year in the small group program. And above that, above 540, he said these levels of consciousness don't shift based on our experience or reading a book. They shift from the energy field itself. He calls it God shock. You ever had a God shock? Profound awe, spiritual ecstasy. That's another major movement in consciousness. So beyond this, to go up to 1,000, there's illumination, self-realization, and enlightenment. So why is that important today? Why did I have to tell you that? Because consciousness is not static. It's always changing. I don't know about you, but I can be in the most loving consciousness and find myself very irritated at things. How did I do that? It's not static. It takes practice. And it takes really embodying it in mind and heart. You know, spiritual evolution is something that unfolds in us. It emerges in us. It's all of what we have been, but currently what we are now and where we're headed in the future. Are we still on the path of knowledge and education, which is why our classes are so important. It's a lifelong learning process because it's easy to wander off this path because it's challenging. All of a sudden we have some anger or pride or fear or apathy or shame, and man, how did I get below 200 again? Pull myself back from that. So the higher levels of consciousness occur spontaneously. Every time we surrender to God and we are unconditional love and we appreciate the sacredness all around us. So we're approaching the new year. And I invite you to take time not so much to wander, but to wonder, what could life be like if you really applied all this and you really did walk a higher level of consciousness? How much more love would you have? How much more fun would you have? How much more joy would you have? Our 40 Days of Prayer program that will be starting in January is to help you amp up that level of consciousness to the greatness around you and let the grace of God speak to you and help you with that. This together will naturally take you to the next level. And that's my message on wondering. So let's pray about that. I so wonder every day, is it really true? Does love permeate the universe? Is God peace, power, beauty, and joy? And then I drive down this street and I see the aura of the earth. And I practically want to fall to my knees. I pay attention to the flowers on our deck. I pay attention to the birds on the lake. I pay attention to the sunrise and the clouds, and it is mysterious. It's all based in the love and the grace of Spirit, creating each one of us to not only experience it, but to pass it on. Pass it on everywhere this holiday season. So I'm so grateful for this talk today and the ability to share what turned me on this week, Dr. Hawkins and all his 50 years of study. Hopefully it awakens within you the awareness that there is so much more love, more happiness, more joy, more of the thrill of being alive, the thrill of participating in a world that's still learning to love itself. So I give great thanks for this opportunity, especially for this teaching. Knowing as I unfold and am able to share with you, I feel the joy in my heart. And I know that's part of my process. And I say thank you, God. And so it is.